On May 31st, 1223, somewhere across the vast expanses of what is now Ukraine, 80,000 warriors were about to learn the most brutal lesson in military history. The air hung thick with dust and the metallic scent of fear. Bodies like broken dolls lay strewn across the steppe, their dying cries mingling with the thundering hooves. By sunset, 9 out of 10 of these combatants would be dead. Their princes would be crushed beneath a triumphant platform as Mongol commanders feasted above them, and the few survivors would carry news that Europe would overlook for 14 years, until it was almost too late. How could an army of 20,000 horsemen annihilate a foe 4 times its size? How could an enemy's overconfidence be turned into their own grave? This is the account of history's most masterfully orchestrated military trap, where pride clashed with genius, and an entire civilization paid dearly. Stay with me, for what you are about to discover will reshape your understanding of warfare, strategy, and the fine line between hunter and prey. To grasp the origins of this catastrophe, we must rewind 3 years and traverse 5,500 miles across some of Earth's harshest terrain. In 1220, Genghis Khan had just completed the destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire, one of Central Asia's most formidable states. Shah Muhammad II made a fatal error by executing Mongol envoys, and Genghis responded with systematic devastation that cemented his name as a synonym for apocalypse. Yet, as the great Khan consolidated his conquests, 2 of his most distinguished commanders requested permission for what they termed a reconnaissance mission. Their names were Jebe and Subutai, and they were among Genghis Khan's 4 dogs of war, hand-picked commanders he trusted above all others. Jebe's own story warrants particular attention, as it unveils the core of Mongol tactics. This man was once an adversary of Genghis Khan. In 1201, during the wars to unify Mongolia, an archer named Jebe shot and purportedly killed Genghis Khan's horse directly beneath him during a battle. After his victory, Genghis inquired who dared make such a shot. Jebe stepped forward and essentially declared, "It was I. You may kill me now, or you may spare me, and I will become your most loyal servant." Genghis was so impressed by this man's courage and honesty that he not only spared him, but renamed him Jebe, meaning arrow, and elevated him to commander status. Within 3 years, Jebe rose to command the crucial left wing during the invasion of Jin China. This exemplifies a meritocracy taken to an almost extreme degree, and it's one reason why the Mongols conquered half the world. Subutai's ascent was equally remarkable. He was the son of a blacksmith, a commoner with no royal lineage, who joined Genghis Khan's forces at just 14 years old. By his 20s, he was already commanding the vanguard of Mongol armies. Genghis referred to him as one of his 4 dogs of war, warriors capable of shattering mountains and crumbling boulders to dust. These men did not adhere to conventional rules. They were innovators, risk-takers, and possessed a comprehension of warfare that, frankly, unnerves me as I study it. Thus, when these 2 requested permission to push further west from Persia, through the Caucasus, and into the European steppes, Genghis granted his blessing. What followed was a campaign spanning over 5,500 miles in 3 years. They swept through Azerbaijan, twice defeated the Georgian kingdom using feigned retreats and pincer maneuvers, subjugated the Alans and Circassians in the Caucasus, and then turned their attention to the Cumans, a Turkic nomadic people who controlled the western steppes. The Cumans stood no chance, and once defeated, their Khan, Kotian, did the only thing he could. He appealed to his son-in-law for aid. This son-in-law was Prince Mstislav Mstislavich of Galich, known historically as Mstislav the Bold, and he was precisely the warrior his epithet suggests: brave, aggressive, and perhaps not as strategically astute as needed. When Kotian arrived at his court with the remnants of his shattered army, the message was stark. Today the Mongols have taken our land, tomorrow they will take yours. This is where the real intrigue begins. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most devastating battles, please do me a favor and hit the like button. It helps more people discover these stories. And honestly, this is the kind of history we should have been taught in school, instead of being forced to memorize dates. Anyway, back to 1223. The Cuman warning triggered a council in Kiev, And here we need to discuss the nature of Kievan Rus. At that time, it wasn't a unified state as we might imagine today. It was a loose confederation of principalities where each ruler, while nominally swearing allegiance to the Grand Prince of Kiev, largely operated with complete autonomy. These rulers dedicated as much effort to internal conflicts as they did to fending off external adversaries. Imagine the United States comprising 50 distinct states that intermittently cooperate and quarrel, yet still consider themselves a unified nation. This was utter political chaos. When the princes convened in Kiev in early 123, the theoretical coalition appeared formidable on paper. Mstislav the Bold led his forces from Galicia. Mstislav II, the elder Romanovich, Grand Prince of Kiev, also dispatched his armies. They were joined by the Prince of Chernihiv, the Prince of Kursk, Danilo Romanovich of Volhynia, and Cuman warriors under Khan Kotian's command. In total, they mustered approximately 80,000 men. However, it's worth noting that only a quarter to a third of these were seasoned fighters. The remainder consisted of militiamen, farmers who had been handed spears and ordered into battle. Yet, there was a fatal flaw that Subutai and Jebe masterfully exploited. They never appointed a single supreme commander. Each prince commanded his own forces and made independent decisions. This was less an army and more an armed committee. And as anyone who has ever participated in a group project knows, committees are where good ideas go to die. The combined Rus forces began congregating in April 1223 at a significant bend in the Dnieper River. They arrived by boat, on horseback, and on foot, a colossal army that must have seemed invincible as it assembled. Meanwhile, some 200 miles to the east, Jebe and Subutai, upon learning of their mobilization, made a seemingly illogical decision. They sent emissaries. Mongol envoys arrived in Kiev with a message of peace.
We bear no animosity towards the Rus people. We are solely pursuing the Cumans, who are our enemies. We are moving eastward, away from your cities. There is no need for war. This was a perfectly reasonable message, a diplomatic overture designed to foster negotiations. However, Mstislav II of Kiev ordered the execution of the envoys. Allow me to pause here, as this decision is particularly intriguing to me. 5 years prior, the Mongols had employed the exact same diplomatic maneuver with the Khwarezmshah, who also executed their envoys. The Khwarezmian Empire subsequently vanished. The Mongols did not send these embassies out of desperation for peace. They were constructing a legal and moral justification for their imminent actions. In the Mongol worldview, the slaying of envoys was considered one of the gravest offenses. This meant that the ensuing violence was not conquest, but justice. Mstislav had just painted a target on every city in Rus.
The Mongols dispatched a second embassy, which simply declared war. Then Jebe and Subutai set their plan in motion. And this is where their brilliance truly begins to shine. They positioned their main contingent of approximately 20,000 horsemen to the east and left behind a rear guard of precisely 1,000 men under an officer named Hambek. Consider this for a moment. You are facing an army of 80,000 and deliberately leave 1,000 of your men where the enemy can find them. This wasn't a defensive posture. It was bait in such a cunning trap that it sends chills down my spine. In late April, the enormous Rus army commenced its eastward march. They crossed the Dnieper on boats lashed together, first the cavalry, then the infantry, moving in a column that stretched for over 15 miles across the steppe. When Mstislav the Bold's scouts discovered Hambek's rear guard on the opposite bank of a small river, the prince took action. He forced a crossing under a barrage of fire, and when his units reached the far bank, their numerical superiority prevailed. The Mongol rear guard fought valiantly, but was overwhelmed. Not a single one survived. The Rus princes were ecstatic. They had just annihilated a Mongol detachment with almost no losses. These Mongols aren't so tough after all, they told each other. They are fleeing in fear. In a few days, we'll catch up to them and finish this. And they gave chase. Oh, how they pursued. For 9 days, the Rus army hounded the main body of the Mongols, pushing ever deeper into the steppe. And here, Subutai and Jebe demonstrated why they are still studied in military academies. They retreated just fast enough to stay ahead, yet slow enough to remain within sight. Periodically they would turn, engage in skirmishes, and then flee again. They would scatter treasures on the ground, as if in a panicked inability to carry them.
They would break formation, seemingly in disarray, only to reform once out of immediate danger. Every action was calculated to reinforce the Rus' belief that they were winning, that the Mongols were desperate, that victory awaited just beyond the next hill. Meanwhile, the Rus' army was disintegrating. The relentless movement under the harsh steppe sun was debilitating the infantry. Blisters formed and bled on their feet. Water supplies dwindled, horses became lame. Crucially, the gap between the detachments of various princes widened. Mstislav the Bold, aggressive as was his nature, pushed forward swiftly, demanding reinforcements from other princes to catch and encircle the Mongols. Meanwhile, Mstislav II of Kiev, more cautious, insisted on a slower pace so that the infantry could keep up. Neither paid heed to the other. The 80,000-strong army gradually devolved into an exhausted, fractured, and squabbling multitude, stretched out over dozens of miles. And the Mongols continued their retreat. Day after day, the Rus warriors began to question the wisdom of the pursuit. What are we doing here? Why are we so far from home? Yet, they had ventured too far to simply turn back now. Pride forbade it. They were resolute. On the evening of May 30th, 1223, the 9th day of the chase, Rus scouts brought electrifying news. The Mongols had halted. They were arraying themselves for battle on the banks of a small river named Kalka. After more than 200 miles of grueling pursuit, the enemy was finally poised to engage. The Rus forces arrived weary but brimming with confidence. Their army numbered 80,000, while the Mongols possibly had 20,000. The math seemed straightforward, but as they established camp, the princes made a series of decisions that, in hindsight, appear like a military catastrophe checklist. They failed to await the full reunification of their troops, neglected to establish a unified command, and didn't even camp together.
Mstislav II of Kiev positioned his 10,000 men on a defensive hill on the river's western bank and did not cross. The remaining troops encamped along both sides of the river. There was no overarching battle plan. Each prince intended to act independently when morning arrived. If you're a military history enthusiast, you're probably yelling at your screen right now. If so, leave comments and let me know what other historical military blunders I should examine, because such analysis is what I live for. Across the river, Subutai observed the chaotic disposition of the Rus forces and made his final adjustments. The trap was set. 9 days of faultless execution had lured the enemy exactly where he desired them: divided, exhausted, overconfident, and poorly positioned. Now was the moment for the decisive blow. At dawn on May 31st, 1223, Mstislav the Bold made a choice that sealed the fate of thousands. He didn't wait for the other princes. He didn't coordinate his actions while they were still asleep. He simply ordered his troops and their Cuman allies to cross the Kalka River and attack. It was a daring cavalry charge, precisely the kind of aggressive maneuver that earned him his epithet. His heavily armored knights, supported by light Cuman cavalry, thundered across the fords and smashed into what appeared to be the Mongol positions. And initially, it seemed to work. The Mongol forces in front of them scattered. The Rus and Cumans pressed forward, breaking through, anticipating victory. "We are winning," must have echoed through their ranks. But this was not the main Mongol line. It was yet another rearguard, another lure, and the trap was about to spring shut with terrifying speed. The main Mongol heavy cavalry was positioned on the flanks, hidden and waiting. Now they wheeled inward in a maneuver so precisely calibrated that it must have been rehearsed for weeks. Within minutes, the Mongol flanks closed around Mstislav's troops from both sides. Simultaneously, Mongol horse archers began to rain arrows down on the mass of Rus warriors from all directions. The transition from pursuit to encirclement happened so rapidly that the Rus in the rear had not yet reached the battlefield, while the vanguard was already plunging into chaos. The Cumans were the first to grasp what was occurring. They had fought with steppe nomads before. They recognized the classic pincer maneuver, the crushing coordination, and they faltered. Thousands of Cuman riders turned and fled back through their own allied lines, creating gaps and confusion. Mongol heavy cavalry surged through these newly formed breaches like water through a burst dam. Prince Mstislav of Chernigov was advancing with his troops when he collided head-on with the panicking Cumans. His men had no idea that the battle had even begun. Suddenly, they found themselves in the heart of hand-to-hand combat, unable to form proper lines, unable to coordinate. The Mongols exacerbated the chaos with smoke bombs, quite literally blinding the Chernigov forces to what was transpiring. The line collapsed. Prince Mstislav of Chernigov perished in this disorder, falling in the very first hour. The Mongol flanks completed the encirclement. The shattered Rus forces were surrounded, their backs to the river. There was no path to retreat, no chance to regroup. The Mongols then unleashed their ultimate skill, systematically annihilating them. Volleys of arrows from powerful composite bows, capable of reaching 300 versts, rained down relentlessly. Cavalry charges exploited every weakness in the lines. Their actions were coordinated, disciplined, and utterly ruthless. This was less a battle, more an execution. Mstislav the Daring managed to breach the Mongol encirclement with his retinue and slip away, heading west. He became one of the few to escape, carrying the horror of the experience with him. Behind him, the carnage continued. The military forces of Halych, Volyn, Kursk, and Chernihiv ceased to exist as viable fighting units within hours. From his vantage point, Mstislav II of Kiev watched with growing dread as his allied troops were decimated. He commanded 10,000 men, the largest remaining contingent, and quickly fortified his position. When the Mongols turned their attention to him, they found a tougher challenge than anticipated. For 3 days, Mstislav's soldiers held their defensive position on the hill, encircled without food or water, listening to the cries of the wounded and observing the Mongol forces circling them like wolves. On the third day, June 2nd, 1223, the Mongol commanders approached under a flag of truce. They offered terms. If Mstislav and his men surrendered, they would be granted safe passage home, unharmed. This promise was sealed with oaths. Desperate and out of options, Mstislav surrendered. The Mongols upheld their promise in the most precise and terrifying way. They did not spill princely blood, which was technically true. Instead, Mstislav and his boyars were bound hand and foot and laid on the ground. A heavy wooden platform was then built over them, and the Mongols held their victory feast upon it. While Subutai, Jebe, and the other Mongol generals feasted, drank, and celebrated above, the Kiev princes slowly suffocated beneath the weight. This was cold, calculated vengeance for the murdered envoys. The message was unmistakable. Cross us, disregard the rules of civilized warfare, and there will be consequences. Let me clarify something important. The Mongols were far from thoughtless barbarians. Their actions were deliberate, strategic, and terror was a calculated weapon.
This execution wasn't sadism for its own sake. It was psychological warfare designed to send a clear message to every ruler in Rus and beyond: underestimate us at your peril and never violate diplomatic protocols. It worked. The tale of events at the Kalka River spread like wildfire. For a generation, the Mongols became figures of dread in Russian folklore. The casualties at Kalka were staggering. Estimates for Rus and Cuman losses range from 20,000 to 60,000 fatalities, with some chronicles suggesting up to 90% of the forces were annihilated. Only 1 in 10 warriors who journeyed east returned home. 9 princes perished, 3 were executed, and 6 were killed during the pursuit to the Dnieper. Mongol losses were minimal, marking one of history's most lopsided military victories. Mstislav the Daring reached the Dnieper and, in a fit of desperation, burned every boat he could find to hinder Mongol pursuit. However, the Mongols did not follow.
They raided a few southern towns, then turned east, crossed the Volga, and began the long trek back to Mongolia. They encountered the Volga Bulgars, lost an ambush battle, won the subsequent engagement, and ultimately rejoined Genghis Khan's main army in 1224. Jebe likely died during or shortly after this campaign, though the exact circumstances remain a mystery. Subutai subsequently conquered more territory than almost any other commander in human history. The truth is, the Battle of Khalkha was not a conquest. It was a reconnaissance mission. Subutai and Jebe were assessing European defenses, gathering intelligence, mapping the terrain, and evaluating military capabilities. They returned with detailed reports on the political fragmentation of the Rus principalities, the quality of their armies, and the nature of the landscape. It was a 3-year intelligence operation that, incidentally, wiped out an 80,000-strong army.
14 years later, in 1237, the Mongols returned with their full might. Subutai led the invasion alongside Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. This time, they weren't scouting, they came to conquer, and they succeeded. Kiev fell, Chernihiv fell, Halych and Volyn fell. The Rus principalities became vassals of what would later be known as the Golden Horde. For the next 240 years, Rus lived under what historians term the Mongol yoke. This period of domination profoundly altered Russian history, culture, and development. All of this could have been avoided had anyone heeded the warnings sounded at the Khalkha River. So, what made this trap so devastatingly effective? Let's delve into it, because the lessons here have far broader applications than just medieval warfare. First, the Mongols understood that victory is forged long before the actual combat. The feigned retreat, which lured the Rus army 200 miles from their homes, was no spontaneous act.
It represented a meticulously crafted strategy, demanding an extraordinary level of discipline. Consider this. Over 9 days, 20,000 horsemen maintained a synchronized withdrawal, never breaking formation, and always keeping just far enough ahead to ensure their adversaries continued the pursuit. Achieving such stunning unit cohesion is nearly unparalleled. Second, they skillfully exploited their opponent's psychological vulnerabilities. The Mongols brilliantly recognized that the Rus princes were proud warriors who had only recently allied against a common threat. They knew that an initial, seemingly easy triumph would be interpreted by these warriors as confirmation of their own strength. Every Mongol decision aimed to boost the Rus' overconfidence, while simultaneously exhausting and fragmenting their forces. This level of psychological warfare, frankly, is quite chilling upon close examination. Third, agility equates to power. Mongol forces could cover distances of 60 to 100 miles daily because each warrior possessed multiple horses. They constantly swapped mounts, keeping their combat units fresh, while the Rus army, burdened by slow infantry and supply trains, became depleted trying to keep pace. In the decisive engagement, when the Mongols needed to swiftly transition from horse archers to heavy cavalry, they executed this transformation within minutes, having planned every detail meticulously in advance. The Rus had no opportunity to adapt. Fourth, and I cannot stress this enough, unified command holds immense significance. The Mongols operated like a single entity under the leadership of Subutai and Jebe. Every unit clearly understood its role. Every maneuver was perfectly coordinated. In contrast, the Rus functioned as 10 distinct formations, with cooperation being sporadic at best. When the critical moment arrived, the absence of centralized command proved fatal for them.
It's no coincidence that modern military doctrine emphasizes a clear chain of command. The Khalkha River serves as a vivid illustration of this principle. Fifth, intelligence wins wars. The Mongols systematically gathered information on the Rus for 3 years. They possessed comprehensive knowledge of the terrain, political landscape, and military capabilities. They knew precisely how far they could push before the Rus would break. The Rus, conversely, knew virtually nothing about their enemy. They fought blindly against an adversary who perceived everything. And finally, patience is a potent weapon. Subutai and Jebe spent 9 days preparing for a battle that concluded in less than 1. They did not rush, they did not improvise, they executed their plan with surgical precision. In our contemporary world of instant gratification, such a degree of endurance in achieving a goal seems almost alien. The impact of Khalkha extended far beyond Rus borders.
In 1241, Mongol forces simultaneously crushed Polish and Hungarian armies in battles occurring on the same weekend. Armies, separated by thousands of miles, employed variations of the tactics honed at Kalka. They advanced to striking distance of Vienna and reached the Adriatic Sea. Only the death of the great Khan Ogedei and the subsequent recall of all princes to Mongolia due to a succession crisis saved Western Europe from invasion. Ponder this. The Mongol Empire was so close to controlling everything from the Pacific to the Atlantic. The Rus chronicler, in describing the Battle of Kalka, conveyed the utter incomprehensibility of what transpired. We do not know where they came from, nor where they went. God sent them for our sins. This is the voice of a civilization encountering something beyond its grasp. A power that appeared, annihilated everything in its path, and then vanished like a ghostly dream.
80,000 men galloped eastward into the steppe, pursuing what they believed to be a defeated enemy. Fewer than 8,000 returned home. This was not merely a battle, it was a masterclass in deception, coordination, and ruthless efficiency. It was the perfect trap. And this is what keeps me up at night when I delve into this. How many other times in history have we been absolutely certain we were the hunters, only to discover too late that we were always the prey? If this deep dive into military history has piqued your interest, I need your help with two things. First, subscribe to the channel because I analyze tales like these that don't make it into textbooks, but absolutely should. And second, leave a comment telling me which other battles or historical events you'd like me to explore with such meticulous detail. Should I cover the Mongol devastation of Baghdad, the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Mongols finally met defeat, or the Siege of Kaffa, where the Black Death potentially began as a result of biological warfare? Tell me, because history isn't merely a collection of dates and names. It's a tapestry of narratives detailing both human ingenuity and devastation, with each one offering valuable lessons for us living in the present. Ensure these tales are not lost to the annals of time. Please share this video, propagate knowledge, and I'll catch you in the next installment.